Thank you again for joining us for today's virtual event. Our goal today is to celebrate how hope has transformed lives throughout King County and to ensure that hope remains available to all in the months ahead. For the Salvation Army, this past year has been a time of evaluation and evolution. We've had to carefully evaluate everything that we do and how we're doing it. We've made regular adjustments to serve people in different ways and to meet increasing community needs, adapting and pivoting as state restrictions and needs have changed. At every level of our organization, an intentional, purposeful, and meaningful approach is being taken to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion are woven into the rich fabric of the hope we provide. From the appointment of diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership roles to increase training and education requirements, throughout our organization, diversity, equity, and inclusion are more than simply missional expectations. We have and will continue to remain steadfast in our commitment to serve all people with dignity and grace as we have the resources to do so. Our mission is really quite simple: to ensure that hope is accessible to everyone that needs our help. We will only achieve this, however, with your continued support. For context, the Salvation Army in King County is made up of 6 centers where we provide hope in the form of client choice food banks, emergency financial assistance, youth programming, pastoral care, and so much more. In addition, we have 8 facilities that provide enhanced and traditional shelter options as well as permanent housing solutions. That totals just shy of 1,000 beds across King County. We're investing in a permanent housing outreach model that has had substantial results. And last, but by no means least, yet more programs and facilities serve specific populations such as the elderly, veterans, individuals in recovery, and people experiencing domestic violence. Today, we're going to talk about our neighbors experiencing homelessness, addiction recovery, and mental health services. These are 3 unique subjects, yet all have important intersection points to recognize, explore, and address as we seek solutions for our homelessness challenges in King County. The Salvation Army is fortunate to have partners in this important work. A few of these partners are with us here today, and I want to introduce them to you now. First is Mary Flowers, City of Seattle Human Services Department. We also have Leo Floor, King County Department of Community and Human Services, and Brandy Cruz, reporter with Q13 TV. We're also joined by 2 colleagues of mine from the Salvation Army, Susan Tiffany, our Divisional Social Services Director, and Captain Felicia Grant, Director of our Seattle Social Services. We're fortunate to work with some very talented individuals and grateful that each of you have joined us today. Really so much for us to say and not enough time for us to do it this afternoon. But over the next 40 minutes or so, our hope is that we can share some of the exceptional challenges that our neighbors experiencing homelessness have and the work that we as an organization are doing to support them and combat homelessness in our community. A note about housekeeping: we welcome your questions. To our audience with us today, we welcome your questions and ask you to use the chat function, and we will do our best to answer them. After the event, we're going to have a dedicated page on our website as a review of the panel discussion, and we'll be answering even more questions there. So let's get started. I'll kick off the discussion with a question, and I may ask a few questions along the way throughout the session in addition, but otherwise I'm pretty confident the conversation's going to flow today. I want to start with Leo. Leo, what is the most significant barrier for our neighbors experiencing homelessness, and what's preventing them from permanent housing?
Thanks, Captain Harvey. It costs too much to have a place to live where we live right now, and there are too many people that don't make enough money to afford it. And so in many ways, it's that simple. What we find is that homelessness takes hold most where we have that combination of really high housing prices and then really high income inequality. And it doesn't correlate to things like behavioral health conditions, for example. Behavioral health conditions are sort of evenly spread throughout the country, the world, the community, but we don't see the incidence of homelessness correspond with where you see higher rates of behavioral health conditions. You see it where housing is expensive and there's income inequality. I think the other thing that we always have to acknowledge is humanization and dehumanization. You've got to feel like you belong to a community to feel like you're a part of the community and to be able to really participate in that community. And I think one of the other challenges that we really do see with folks who are unsheltered is we do a lot of things like say that they're outside of society, or when they rejoin us in society, they're part of our society. They're our neighbors. And then there's a final, very specific component of dehumanization that is racism. We have a country that has, for hundreds of years, had policies that very specifically excluded Black and Indigenous people in particular, and they are the populations that experience homelessness most disproportionately, and that's not a mistake. But the reason I have hope is because those same policies that we created that did that for hundreds of years, we can have policies that undo that. And I think that's another thing that we can do that can help reduce those barriers and get more folks inside and keep them in our society.
Thank you. It's important that those that are watching today know that we're committed to breaking down those barriers, to working through those barriers, and making sure that hope is really accessible to everyone that needs it. Mary, I want to turn to you. You've been working for the city of Seattle for a couple of years now, I think, probably a couple of decades, I would imagine. How has homelessness changed in the past few years, and have services to our neighbors adapted to that change? Mary, I'm going to need you to unmute.
Thank you. This region has really changed. The whole region has changed. And so people who are experiencing homelessness are, caught up in that change that everyone is experiencing. I think Leo talked about the high cost of living here. There's been really kind of a legacy for planned growth in this area, not just in the last 10 years, in the last 150 years. And there's been bias built into that around both poverty and race. And so when we think about people who were here 150 years ago and basically were thriving here, and who are now one of the highest statistics in terms of homelessness, that happened because people were displaced, people were moved off the land. There were land grants that were given out. We see the legacy of the Yeslers and the Bells and the Van Assels and all of those families who were given land grants. And we're now serving the people who were dispossessed of the land. So it's important to contextualize homelessness. It's important to, even talking about it in current terms, we have to give the historic context to that. Otherwise, I think we do a disservice to people. While that was going on with Indigenous people here, slavery was in full swing, 1850s, when land was being granted. And so many of the institutions and the power dynamics that we have now are rooted there. And so are some of the maladies that we see in terms of poverty and homelessness, and some of the other issues that we talk about in terms of mental health, trauma, addiction. They're rooted very firmly in that history. So I think we must look at the totality of the history in the region.
Thanks for that information. Mary, you've worked with us for a number of years now, obviously. And particularly over this past year, as we've addressed the pandemic, and we've had to adapt our services and really pivot so many times over this time period. What have you seen from our organization? How have you seen the Salvation Army really respond to the needs that are out there?
I will say in March, April, May, this time last year, when Seattle was indoors, so many people were still outdoors, and I can't even, it's hard to even explain what I witnessed with Salvation Army. They were out every single day. When we talk about pivoting, we're not just talking about pivoting, we're talking about relocating hundreds of people in a day, in some cases, in some cases in an evening. And we've had crisis upon crisis. We were really talking earlier, even the smoke crisis. It was on top of everything else. And in the moment's notice, we called the Salvation Army and asked you once again to pivot. It's like, pivot again. We asked you to pivot last week, pivot again, and you pivoted. And it was to be actually in the streets, in the field, in the shelters with people who were, COVID was hitting your staff as well. You were not immune to COVID. And yet people were there, they were coming to work, they were showing up, particularly at times when in March and April, when at that point in time, when someone thought if you got COVID, you were going to die. I mean, that's just what we thought. And people still showed up. And so I cannot say enough for your staff and the dedication. They went home, not only their families, the families of your staff as well. So I just cannot say enough. I'm often very, I guess, a critical lover of our system, of our services, all of that. I see Leo smiling, he knows that. But it was a humbling experience to be with people who were showing up in ways that we didn't have masks at first. There was none of that. You couldn't get hand sanitizer. I mean, maybe if you had like on the illegal market, you could get it, but it was thermometers, just things like that. And I think that many people, I think you're right, the staff who were working in shelters and people who were experiencing homelessness who were there are right up there with health workers to me.
Thank you. Thanks for that. We're gonna come to Susan in just a minute, but I remember Susan in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic. Susan made comment to us as a team as we created an incident team immediately. Things sort of broke out here in King County. And I remember Susan saying, be prepared for us to lose a significant portion of our staff as a result of this. And I was really, quite frankly, shocked by how many staff did choose to come to work, who were committed enough to say, we need to continue to do this. People need our help. And so thanks for sharing that. I want to turn our attention to Brandy. Brandy, thanks for joining us today. You're part of the media and as a reporter with Q13 TV. What does it say about our city and region that the media is dedicated so many resources to covering homelessness issues? And I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it says that it's a problem, which I would argue is a bad thing. Media locally, especially over the past decade, and I've been in Seattle for about a decade now, newsrooms have gotten smaller, resources are scarce, and the fact that we continue to dedicate so many resources to this issue tells you how deep the crisis actually is. And I do want to start just something Mary said that made me realize I should start with an acknowledgement. The media, when it comes to this crisis, has the easiest job out of everyone on this call. The folks who are on the ground every single day. I always say I tell politicians this. It's very easy to point out problems. It's much harder to come up with solutions. And I think that we realize that. But at the same time, the press has an incredibly important role to make sure that the city and the county are delivering outcomes. At the end of the day, when people's lives are on the line, and when the city, you look at the other profound impacts of this crisis, outcomes are the only thing that matters. Trying isn't enough. I know we try things sometimes that don't work, but the reality is, we've been in a state of emergency on homelessness for years. And I don't know up until recently if we've ever truly treated it as an emergency. I will say prior to me joining you today, I was so grateful for the Salvation Army to give me a very long tour of the Soto shelter. It was wonderful to see. I've been in a variety of settings for my job when it comes to shelters, camps, tiny home villages. This Soto shelter to me seems like a model that will work and a model that will be able to get more people off our streets. I was really impressed by the atmosphere there, by the people working there, and just by how everything worked as a whole. So I was so grateful to be able to see that and bring that knowledge into our conversation today. But overall, I would say, look, the media would love to dedicate resources to something else because we would love to see homelessness no longer be a crisis in our communities. And so that's why you see us covering it, I think, as relentlessly as we do.
Brandy, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but you make a career out of this, so you'll do way better than I would. But over this past year or so, maybe the last few years, what has impacted you the most as you've covered homelessness in our community? What has impacted you the most in that? What's really spoken to you and caused you to say, I want to be a part of doing something about that?
Sure. Well, I think twofold. One is personal, and I've shared this publicly on TV. I've written about it. My father died 2 years ago last week, and he died homeless. He died in a cheap motel room surrounded by booze and drugs. And my father struggled with mental health issues all my life that really, I think, contributed to his underlying alcoholism and substance abuse. And so for me, losing my dad 2 years ago, May 5th, was my whole life, I think, was something that kind of has prepared me to cover this in a way that's not only empathetic, but realistic. And some people think I'm too hard on the city about homelessness, but it comes from a place as a loved one who lost someone to homelessness, who knows firsthand just how profound of a challenge it is, who knows firsthand that throwing money at it, when I finally started to make money, didn't fix the problem either. And who knows that you really have to tackle it and be honest about the problems that exist. And my dad's problems were lack of money, mental health, drug abuse. And so I think that was part of it. And going out to camps and seeing people. And I will say the other day at Soto Shelter, and I didn't tell the folks at the Salvation Army this, but we walked into one of the shelter units, and there wasn't, somebody will help me with the name. There's people who monitor each of the shelter bays. What do you
literally our shelter monitors?
Oh yeah, shelter monitors. And I walked in and he looked exactly like my father. And it was about the 2-year mark as a shelter monitor working there. And it was just sort of overwhelming to be in that scenario and then to see someone who looked just like my dad. So it's given me a lot of empathy, but at the same time, it leads me to want to be more realistic in my coverage about how challenging this really is. And that I know it's expensive to live here, but we have people on our streets who are also facing a whole variety of challenges that make the cost of living aspect of it just a part of the equation. And I think also, one of the other things in the past 2 years is there has been this desire to sort of cut out other impacts that homelessness is having from part of the conversation. And what I mean by that is we have to be honest about the impact to the businesses. We have to be honest about the impact to quality of life and to tourism, into our downtown core, to our parks. And there's sort of this desire to dismiss people who are concerned about those things as NIMBYs that, not in my backyard, or people who don't care about the suffering. But we all have to understand that, this is about addition, not subtraction. In order to have everyone on board to solve this problem, we cannot alienate our partners in the private sector who are impacted by it and want to help. We cannot alienate police officers, some of whom are trained to help with people in crisis. And so I think it's important that we are honest about the holistic impacts of the homeless crisis. Always putting human suffering first, of course, but honest about it holistically, and then proceed from there with everyone at the table and everyone being heard and understood about the way that this crisis impacts them. So I think those are a couple things of the past year, 2 years that have really spoken to me about the direction I would like to take my reporting, and then also sort of the lens that I'm looking at the issue through.
I mean, I think what you point to, and what we've heard from Mary already, what we've heard from Leo, is that homelessness is not a one and done simple thing to solve. There is many layers of complex matters that lead us that lead to someone being homeless and staying homeless, and coming together and creating solutions to that. Is what we've got to do, and I appreciate. Thank you for sharing, Brandy, personally. But again, I appreciate that the highlight of the fact that these are complex matters. I want to turn our attention to Susan Tiffany. Susan, I'm privileged to work alongside some highly educated, very skilled individuals, and Susan is one of those as an educated social worker and part of the Salvation Army's team. How many of our homeless neighbors are struggling with mental illness challenges and or addiction, and what services are we able to offer?
So, according to a 2019 report by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, we have about roughly 21% of people experiencing homelessness also live with severe mental illness. And that severe mental illness is things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, those really intense, very difficult to treat mental health illnesses. About 16% of that population also suffers from a chronic substance use disorder or substance abuse disorder. I think what I find interesting about these statistics is it talks about severe mental illness. And in my opinion, and from what I've seen working in the field, is living homeless is traumatic. And so every person that is living homeless has a level of mental health issues that they're dealing with, whether it be the trauma of being homeless, the trauma of living, separated from your family and your loved ones. Maybe it is anxiety disorder, panic disorders, those types of things. And then there are the co-occurring disorders as well. So these are people that are living homeless with both mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And I think that that is really significant. And it does have a huge impact on someone's ability to stabilize and then obtain and maintain housing independently on their own. So some of the services that we provide through our King County Shelter Program and with Seattle Social Services, and I just listening to Leo and to Mary and to Brandy, one of the things that Brandy mentioned specifically was the atmosphere at the Soto shelter. And so I think one of the most valuable things that the Salvation Army provides, and this is our case managers, our case manager assistants, our shelter monitors, not me, I'm not there every day, but these are the people on the front lines. And it is the unconditional compassion, dignity, and respect that they give every single person who walks through that door, whether it's somebody living homeless with mental illness and addiction issues, or it is you, Captain Harvey, walking through the door, or Dow Constantine coming in for a tour, or something like that. So that's valuable, and it makes people feel seen, and it makes them feel heard. And I think that is the first step for healing for people who have mental health issues and substance abuse issues. So in addition to that, which is invaluable, we also have case management, we have peer support, case management assistance. We also provide housing navigation services once someone is stabilized and ready to really look towards being able to get into housing and maintain housing. We do resource and referral to our partners in the community. We provide spiritual support when it is requested by our guests, and then also follow-up services and support. I think that's a really valuable piece of that puzzle to keeping somebody housed once they are ready to go in that direction. And then we also, through internship agreements with colleges and universities, we also have interns that can come and provide not just case management services, but for our interns who are working on a master's level degree, they are able to come in and provide some crisis intervention, crisis support, and some mental health counseling for people to help people stabilize and get connected to more long-term supportive mental health systems in the community.
Excellent. Thank you. I was thinking as I asked you that question, we could be here a while because there's a lot going on a day-to-day basis. And I'd like in a moment to sort of come back to the group. I have one sort of final question for the group, but I'd also like to ask the group, what are your impressions as you walk into Salvation Army facilities in King County? What are your impressions? What are you seeing in the people that we serve? I visited last Friday, and there was an individual that was experiencing some challenges. It would appear had some mental health challenges going on, and I was really touched by the way the staff were addressing that individual with such such respect, such grace. I was just very impressed by, it's our own team, but they just never cease to impress me sometimes. I want to go to Captain Grant, and you play a vital role in the operation of our Seattle Social Services programs. You play a vital role in managing and identifying partnerships that we work with. What is successful collaboration between partners look like to you?
We have many. I should begin with that. And I think one of the successful elements to this collaboration or partnership is transparency and really being very real about the intensity or the level of support that we need as a department. Making sure that partners come in understanding what to expect and making sure that they understand how they, within their own resources, can support someone. Sometimes even as an agency, the thought of coming into a shelter and supporting homeless can be overwhelming based on what they've seen in other environments, and just allowing them the opportunity to come in and see what a shelter looks like in 2021. And the clients that are actually really open and embrace community relationships, right? A lot of times homeless are very isolated and they feel ostracized and they feel like they're being judged. And for partners to come in and really take the time to actually speak to someone one-on-one and to just connect with them, even if it's passing out a plate of food, just that I'm here because I want to be here and not because I have to be here. These community leaders, academia, municipalities come in and they're doing this because their heart compels them to participate and support someone less fortunate, someone that cannot do for themselves. And so I think the success lies with the partners. They bring themselves to the table. They bring their resources, their passions, their experience and expertise to help us. I say it takes a village to raise a village, right? As someone said earlier, it's a very complex issue, and it's going to take many individuals, many partners and collaborations in order for us to support something that I feel is like on a pandemic level, and that requires such intense and constant support that not one agency, not one group can accomplish it in and of themselves. It's going to take a very dynamic group of partners to come together and decide to put our homeless community first and do whatever it takes to do that. And we've had so many partners that want to be a part of that. And however big or however small, they just want to contribute and give back in some way, shape, or form. And many of them having a story that connects them to or gives them experience with homelessness, whether it's a family or close friend, whether they've seen this in their own neighborhoods, but they just have a personal connection. And through that, they bring themselves, community leaders harness, and rally people around to bring what they have to our programs and to the community. So collaboration is really the success, I should say, is really on the part of our partners and them coming ready to do and willing to do whatever it takes to show love and compassion and respect to our homeless community.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain Grant. I want to open a question up to the entire panel. It sort of touched on the fact that I think everybody on the panel has visited one of our facilities somewhere around the county. What encourages you when you visit those locations? Is there anything that sort of you look at and go, that encourages me that there's hope here. That encourages me that there's something's going to change here.
I can elaborate on what I meant by sort of the climate when I walked in the Soto shelter. One of the first things I noticed, well, first, it's secure, and security is important, and it's important for the people living in there that they feel like they have a safe place to go. But right beyond the security gate, it was a really hot day out, and there was this big kind of tent outside, open air tent. And people were just lounging, hanging out with each other, chatting, laughing. And it just felt immediately like, it didn't feel like a shelter. It felt like a very welcoming environment. And then we went into the areas, where people are living. And I've been to some shelters that don't have enough privacy, and that's always a problem. And then shelters where maybe things are a little too closed off. And I found it to be sort of a good mix where people have their own space. There was women just in their rooms reading books, relaxing. And that's so important to be able to give them a space where they can feel like they have privacy, where they can feel dignified, where they can relax if they'd like to, or where they can be outside and be chatting with people and build that sort of community and those relationships where they can help each other through a really challenging situation. And so that was the first thing I noticed. And I had mentioned it to you folks when you were walking me around. And everything they need. You might have to leave for some things, but they have services there, showers. The facility is really well equipped. And also just something that Captain Grant had said, you had mentioned, how we treated the COVID crisis. We've seen over the past year what it looks like to truly dedicate all of our resources and efforts to solving an emergency that was killing people. Well, homelessness is also taking lives. Homelessness, people are dying on our streets, and it's been an emergency, quote unquote, for years. Yet we've seen this problem get worse. And so I think we know what it takes now. And I think dedicating that same amount of energy and focus to really tackling this crisis is what we're going to need to get out of it and to dig ourselves out of this place that we found ourselves in.
All right, thank you. Anybody else on the panel? Again, I'm interested, right in the very beginning of our panel discussion, we touched on some very challenging matters that are important to us. The way that there are populations that have been disproportionately impacted with homelessness and such. Again, to the rest of our panel, do you see hope? Is there hope on the horizon? What do you see as you stop by, as you visit our locations and you're out on the streets talking with people?
I mean, I can offer this, Captain Harvey. I have hope. One of the first things that always sticks out to me at a Salvation Army location is that it's open. If I go back to snowstorms in 2019, if I go back to the beginning of the COVID crisis, if I go to the smoke, crisis of last summer, if I go to the other snowstorm that happened last year, being open, showing up, as Mary said, having people who show up to help, regardless if it was hard or dangerous to drive there, or when it was dangerous to actually be there because of, a virus we didn't know a whole lot about at the time. It's open, and that means everything when you show up and you provide the service, regardless of how hard it is. I also have hope because, I agree with something that Brandy was talking about. We have to make it so that homelessness isn't a thing we debate about. Homelessness is a thing we do something about. And I think we have a moment in our community right now. And a lot of it is due to organizations like Salvation Army, who did something over the last year. I remember giving you all a call. Hey, we need to create new shelters in 3 and 4 weeks. And we were working with the city of Seattle, and Mary was on the ground working with your team, and we were getting people in. And we proved that if you can get a community to accept the facility, you can get the government to fund the facility, you can get organizations and providers to operate the facility, you'll get people to come inside that facility. And now we just need to do that over and over and over again across the whole county. And we're starting to see that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
I
Mary,
would say,
your microphone go off.
yes, I would say that I'm very hopeful that there's a real desire. I'm hearing a real desire to engage the people who are living in the shelters in a very different way, and to work with other providers. I think when Captain Felicia talked about, those partnerships, but not just partnerships to serve, partnership to build power for people to really begin to understand and get some agency in their personal situations. Because I know that there's a strong organizing effort among people who are living unsheltered to understand how dysfunction, we talk about how dysfunctional and all of the issues that are plaguing people who are homeless. Our systems are broken. our systems are really broken. And I'm thankful for and hopeful too, not just Salvation Army. I look at Leo, we were in trenches before COVID, just around one person. And we just basically did every single thing that we could do for that one person. And it was so frustrating, the roadblocks that we hit. And I really believe that the people who are experiencing those roadblocks are not just in one system, not just the one shelter or one agency, but to begin to change the system so that it's very frustrating. It is so frustrating, the resources that we have, and yet the constraints on our dollars, the constraints on our programs. It is a maze navigating. And so the hope that I have is that I believe that Salvation Army is a thought partner in that. I think that Salvation Army does desire to address racism, to address social justice, and to do that in partnership with people that you're working with, that we actually are paid. We all get our jobs, including Brandy, including you too, because it makes, we're all getting paid on this crisis. And I think we need to acknowledge that and have a different relationship with people that are responsible for us having paychecks. And I really see movement with Salvation Army and accepting not only the wonderful things that as an organization that you've done, but also just that legacy, how we've all contributed, our systems and agencies have contributed to some of what we're seeing right now in negative ways. And so we have to face that. Hope, and I was that scripture about faith, hope, and love, and the greatest is love. And someone would say, if you tell the truth is what's going to get us to love. And that's a hard thing to face. I love the work of Salvation Army. I can also look at the legacy that it's had also in helping with some of the oppression inadvertently, even while helping. City of Seattle, King County, Q13, and the whole media. We're all really responsible systemically for what's going on. And I love that Salvation Army is about changing that. It takes courage. It takes a lot of courage.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to sort of conclude our time. When I stopped by a couple of weeks ago to the Soto shelter, our street level team were there, and they were loading up some things into their van. I think it was a toaster and a couple of other things, because they were moving a client into a permanent solution. And I want to open this up to everybody. Once we get someone in a permanent solution, what are the factors that help ensure that they stay housed? What are some of those factors that ensure that happens? I'll open that up to anyone on our panel, and then we're going to conclude after that.
I think we've all said it over and over now, community. Mm-hmm. Community, community, community. It's so important.
I would agree with Susan's comment. I think in addition, the key to make sure the client is placed in a home that is specifically designed or meets their needs. It's just not a placement. We are being intentional about making sure they're in a community and housing that works for them so that they can then take ownership and then begin to rebound in that environment. And so that is very important. It's also important for the continuation of services or continuum of care. Once they're outside of our facility, how are they going to continue to stay connected with those resources that got them there to begin with? So within the shelter program, they have case managers and housing navigators that kind of chaperone them and shepherd them into keeping appointments, reminding them of responsibility. So the shelter provides that discipline to address these issues. And so past that, we need to make sure that the resources that we connect them with are going to do the same in return. They're going to call these individuals and make sure, remind them and keep track of them, because that's where we see the danger, the challenge for our clients is beginning to disconnect from the very resources that allow them to get to the place they're at. But finally, it is, we have seen that people who do the best are those that belong to community, recovery, spiritual reunification with family. It's important to have that support. They're in a new life, right? A new mindset, and you need that support to continue that. It doesn't happen overnight, and you have to keep building upon that, right? So that they can continue to make those really positive life changes and decisions that will allow them to build on and continue in their self-sufficiency. So definitely leave it with community of all levels, all nature. That is really, in addition to resources, critical for the success of our clients that are exited to permanent housing.
Great, thank you. Brandy, did you have a final comment?
Yeah, I would say that follow through from a media perspective, the follow through is what we expect and what we'd like to see. I was happy to hear that when folks leave the SODO shelter, that you're not just saying goodbye, enjoy this permanent housing, good luck to you. There are still access to services that they're getting, and that is so critical because moving into permanent housing, and I know this from the one time we thought my dad was moving into a semi-permanent situation. That's really just the beginning of a whole new chapter, and the struggle really continues for these individuals. And so it's so important to just continue those bonds with the services and the service providers that have helped them get to that point. And then also, and again, I mean, community is important. Having a place where they feel like they belong, where they feel comfortable. And maybe that's outside the city of Seattle. Maybe it's somewhere where they have family as well, and really identifying not only, what setting they're going to be most comfortable and successful in, but also identifying what place they're going to be the most comfortable and successful in.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to bring our conversation to a conclusion. Again, if you have comments or questions, please put them in the chat, and our team will be happy to try to answer those. And again, we will have a page on our website dedicated to answering more of your questions. Thank you to Brandy, to Mary, to Leo, Captain Felicia, Susan. Thank you for being a part of this discussion with us this afternoon. There truly is hope on the way. True hope has already been in action. Hope has been happening, but hope truly is on the way for the future. Thank you so much for being a part of this afternoon.
Absolutely.
Friends, we've reached the end of our time, and we've only scratched the surface of homelessness, addiction, and mental health in our community. As you can see, we have much work to do, but hope is clearly being delivered and remains on its way every day as we continue serving our neighbors experiencing homelessness with compassion, dignified, results-driven, informed services. As an organization, we are poised to cast an inspiring vision for the future so that we can provide even more hope to our beloved community. Conversations like this motivate, excite, and drive us to imagine what is possible and to take bold, life-transforming steps of faith. I hope today's conversation has helped you look at homelessness with renewed grace and compassion, to better understand the work of our panelists and the teams that they lead, and has inspired you to help make our community a better place for all.